Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. I was in both Mexico and Colombia over the August recess, in part to take a look at our Venezuela policy. It's really hard to overhype what a disaster President Trump's Venezuela policy was. This decision to push all of our chips into the middle of the table all at once, recognize Guaido, and try to facilitate a coup made us look ham-handed and, in the end, feckless. Recognizing someone as the leader of a country who is not actually the leader of the country, it doesn't actually make us look strong. It makes us look weak. And we are stuck inheriting a policy that did not work, that has, in part, contributed to a humanitarian disaster that now brings thousands and thousands of Venezuelans to our border seeking salvation. And so I support strategic engagement with a purpose. And that purpose has to be a election that draws the participation of all political groups and gives Venezuelans the chance to exercise their right to determine the future of the country. And so I've heard, since Secretary Nichols, you suggest that there's a possibility of being able to get to an election in 2024, but what does a free and fair election look like in Venezuela? What are our benchmarks to know whether this is an election that we can support and that the Venezuelan people actually have a chance at exercising their free will? Listen, I understand it's not going to look like an election in our country, right? And I don't know that we should hold it to that standard, but we have to have some pretty clear baselines. What are we looking for as we try to get towards a viable election?
Thank you, Senator. The European Union's electoral observation mission, I think, has provided the most comprehensive roadmap, along with the Carter Center, to what that would look like. And it involves things like inequality of access and equality of access to the media, rules that ensure that electoral authorities cannot disqualify candidates arbitrarily, access to areas to campaign, and a cessation of the abuses by security forces of opposition candidates, transparency in the preparations technically for the election and the conducting of the election. It means allowing the opposition to carry out a primary process. As we've seen, when they have unified candidates, they will beat the regime candidates even when everything else is tilted against them. A key part of the discussions between the unitary platform and the regime will be the implementation of this process, and we support that.
Ms. Escobari, there's no doubt that the humanitarian disaster in Venezuela is first, second, and third a consequence of the regime's unconscionable policies. But I think we should be honest that our sanctions contribute to the humanitarian nightmare, and we can argue that there are good reasons for our sanctions. But what worries me is a GAO report from last year that suggests we actually don't have real good information about how and if our sanctions are contributing to the humanitarian crisis inside Venezuela. The report found that Treasury and its interagency partners are limited in their ability to develop further actions to ensure that U.S. sanctions don't disrupt humanitarian assistance. Are you familiar with this report? And if so, how is USAID engaged with our implementing partners to mitigate these challenges? And how do we make sure that we have visibility inside Venezuela to understand what the actual impact of our sanctions are?
As you said, it's very hard to separate the secondary effects. It is also very clear that the deterioration of the economy preceded the sanctions, and that we have this capacity to work on humanitarian aid. And the government also has the capacity to have invested in many of the services that are now not functioning in Venezuela. A lot of our financing and our work goes to create a network of human rights defenders, universities, and civil society organizations that are getting information about where the most vulnerable people are, the nature of the crisis, as to target our humanitarian aid to those that are most vulnerable. And there's actually a very sophisticated and courageous network of humanitarian organizations that are on the ground that know where where the most vulnerable people are, and it is where we focus our humanitarian assistance inside the country.
Well, look forward to speaking with you more directly about this specific report and your responses to it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.